Okay, so let's get started. To start with, hello, my name is Regan, and welcome to this Early Careers and Insight into the Life of Operational Meteorologists event. This meeting is being recorded, and to start with, I'm just going to go over some sort of tips of Zoom. So we asked if you have any questions for either of the speakers today to please put them in the Q&A section rather than the chat. So hopefully you'll see that at the bottom or maybe at the top of the Zoom window. And then after each speaker has finished talking, I can ask your questions to them. If you have, for example, the Q&A or the chat open on the side and you want to make the PowerPoint bigger, then you can just close the chat and expand the screen. And if you at any point have technical issues with Zoom, then you can try switching to another browser. And there are some sort of recommended ones on the slide, like Chrome or Firefox, for example. I also wanted to quickly mention a little bit about Royal MetSoc membership. You may or may not be a member if you're attending this event. If you're not, then you can join whether you are kind of working in or if you're just interested in meteorology, weather or climate. And we have members from around the world who are professionals, academics, students, as well as enthusiasts. And there are a lot of benefits to being a member. So, for example, you can get a copy of the Weather Journal each month. You can also access a lot of our other journals online, and you will get the monthly newsletter online via your email, which has things like the latest news and updates about upcoming events. And you also can get discounts to conferences and paid for meetings and access to support grants and legacy funding. And if you are a student or if you're an early career, so 3 years since graduating, then you can get the kind of reduced student membership rate. And a little bit on this topic, I wanted to mention the Youth and Early Career Special Interest Group. So this is a group that's part of the Royal MetSoc, and it's specifically to kind of help the society engage with young people and early careers. And our group is, I think, about 15 of us at the moment from across industry and academia. So includes, for example, undergraduates, PhD students, and people working in insurance, for example. And we do all sorts of things, but we tend to advise on or help to develop content and activities to support youth and early careers, which could be anything from our new student ambassador program or the Early Career and Student Conference, which is due to be announced, I think, very soon. So keep an eye on the events page for that. We meet about 3 times a year, and we're actually looking for some more representation from people in industry and also from the youth. So that's kind of 16 to 24. So if you're interested, you can email me. So I'm Regan at fellowship@rmets.org, or you can get in contact with Hannah Mallison, who's the Science Engagement Manager for the Royal MetSoc. And we also have a webpage on this special interest group if you want to learn a bit more. And I think that's kind of it from me. We're going to start with our first speaker today, Jonathan, who's been at the Met Office for about 4 years and does a lot of work with media. So Jonathan, I won't say more than that. If you'd like to unmute and put your video on, I'll hand over to you.
Hi there, everyone. Thank you very much, Regan. Let me share my screen so we can get going. Okay, weird. I got my microphone got turned off when I was. Okay, well, I'll have to share it this way for now, and then I think reshare it when we get to the video part so that you can all hear what's actually on the screen. Okay, yeah, so thank you very much, everyone, for coming. It's great to be with you today. Thanks for having Zoe and I along. We are both early career meteorologists at the Met Office, so we're just going to be taking you through a few things of our journey, what we've been through over the past 4 or 5 years or so. Whilst we're both at the Met Office, we have had very different journeys. So hopefully both presentations will be quite different from one another and interesting in terms of seeing the various different things that you can get involved with at the organisation. So I thought I'd just start things off with just a little intro about how I got here, essentially. I Meteorology was not necessarily the always obvious choice for me when I was growing up. I actually chose my A levels thinking that I was going to go into medicine, just because my dad is a GP, and I was that sort of person who was like, yeah, that seems all right. I'll just go along with that as well. Um, and then sort of realized I should probably actually choose a career path that I'm sort of really passionate about, really interested in. So, I mean, the A levels that I sort of went about with was geography, maths, and chemistry. So very much a science background. I did then end up realizing that out of those three, geography was sort of the subject that I was enjoying the most. So that led me on to a geography undergraduate degree, which I did at Durham. Spent 3 years there, which was really fun. Got to do my dissertation out in Iceland on to the glaciers there, and sort of whilst there were lots of areas of geography that I was really interested in, initially it was that sort of glaciology, understanding ice dynamics that really grabbed me. So initially, I went off and did an MPhil at Cambridge for polar studies. So that was at the Scott Polar Research Institute in Cambridge itself, which was really interesting, and sort of getting involved with that side of things. But I think the one thing I realized over the course of that year was that a career in academia and reading and writing academic papers wasn't necessarily going to be the thing for me. I think so. I took another step back, had to think about what other areas of geography was I really interested in that would also just allow me to be, I guess, a bit more customer focused at times while still keeping the science background as well. And I eventually decided to settle on meteorology. Again, another of the areas that I've been really interested in while studying geography, the dynamics of the atmosphere, how it all interacts across the globe, and sort of decided to set my path on there. I initially applied for the Met Office and didn't get in. So I had to again do a little bit of a step back and think about how can I improve my sort of skill set, improve on things that I've done previously, and I think the one thing that I was sort of missing ever since A levels essentially was the physics side of things. I would say physics was my least favorite science at GCSE for um, not necessarily because it was bad, just because I preferred chemistry and biology a bit more. But when I was deciding to sort of really get into meteorology, realized that physics is certainly something that it is worth having in your arsenal and being able to get involved with that. So that led me to doing an applied meteorology master's at Reading to not only understand sort of more about the meteorology side of things, but also to really get my grips around the maths and physics side as well. And I would say the physics modules in that master's were the toughest ones for me, but we did eventually get through that and was lucky enough to be offered a job at the Met Office. And have been loving the past 4 years ever since then, really. In terms of then my career at the Met Office so far, so I eventually joined in November 2019, and I went straight into the Operational Meteorologist Foundation course. So I was actually the last cohort to go straight into the OMFC. This is sort of your theory-based thing, where you learn all the technical side of things. You sit various sort of written and practical exams, and sort of really get your head around the sort of. Again, this is where the physics sort of really came into things, but all the other aspects of meteorology as well. So that was sort of the first 6 months of my career. I then had a sort of interim section as an operational meteorologist technician. This is now where sort of everyone entering the Met Office essentially sort of starts with. It gives you sort of a year or so of essentially on-the-job training, whether you're based in Exeter or at a defence site across the UK or abroad. Just getting a bit of training in terms of how operational meteorology works, what are the things that people look for, and also gives you a lot of insight into observations and just sort of really getting your head around sort of observing the weather to aid your forecasting skills later on. For me, that was just a little bit of an interim thing to get a bit of experience in there. And then my sort of first role, sort of proper role in the Met Office, was as a civil aviation forecaster. So everyone, once you've done your sort of theory-based training, starts off as an aviation forecaster. Zoe and many others, like us in the Met Office, have done their aviation training in sort of the defence side, so at the RAF bases across the UK, and she'll go into a little bit more detail about that. I was based purely in Exeter, so I was dealing with the civil aviation side of things. So that is your sort of standard civil airport. So if you've ever flown out of Newcastle, Manchester, Leeds, Bradford, Birmingham, then I've been doing the forecasts for those and producing all the sort of TAFs is what we call it, a sort of terminal aerodrome forecast, and other bits and bobs to make sure our planes are flying safely and securely through the skies, and they're able to take off and land, because our forecasts do have quite a big impact on sort of delays and cancellations to airports and things. So I spent a bit of time as a civil aviation forecaster. I still sort of do that as a sort of, I guess, 25% role every now and again. But the main area that I'm now focused in is the media services team. So this is Becky, one of the ITV weather presenters. And here in the media services team at the Met Office, we are sort of the behind the scenes people a lot of the time. We are finding out the stats, finding out all the details of the weather story to then tell weather presenters and brief them on what they need to be talking about when they take to the airwaves, and be that on sort of radio or TV. So the second half of my presentation is going to go into a lot more detail in regards to that, because that's my main sort of role at the moment. In amongst all of that, though, there was one thing that I guess sort of scuppered things at times, and that was this lovely COVID-19 that came along. So the week before I was due to take my final examinations during the OMFC was the week that the country went into lockdown. We were all told to go home, and we had to find a way to work out how we were actually going to do our final exams remotely. So we were sort of the guinea pig tests of this sort of remote working situation. And I then ended up doing all my OMT work and training as a civil aviation forecaster. All of that training I had to do remotely from home. There were some positives and some negatives in association with that. I think overall, if you were to say what's been the most challenging situation of my time at the Met Office so far, it would probably be this sort of training period, having to train during the COVID-19 pandemic. I think particularly the one on the top right there, sort of lack of contact when you are sort of by yourself, alone at home doing the training remotely. You're just not able to witness what other people are doing in the same way. There is this tendency when you're sort of speaking to someone remotely that, you just essentially do it by chat a little bit. So you sort of see what someone is going to be chatting you through, but you're never really seeing their screen, what they're looking at, how they interpret things, what they've got up on their screen, and being able to, I think, sort of have in-person training since the COVID-19 pandemic has been over, and sort of, I guess, being on the trainer side of that has worked a lot better in my sort of view compared to the sort of the remote training that has worked. But then I guess sort of remote working has probably become quite a positive for a lot of people. I do my night shifts from home now, rather than traipsing into the office. to stubbornly do a sort of a weary-eyed night shift to then have to travel all the way back home again. I now get to just sort of sit here, do all the work that I would do, while still then being able to just sort of jump into bed afterwards and sort of just sit here in my dressing gown and sort of get on with that. So certainly there have been some positives in regards to that remote working aspect. You also become quite a lot more self-sufficient, I think, or certainly I have through this sort of remote training situation. You're sort of left to your own devices a bit more. You've got to be able to really pull your own weight in terms of what you're forecasting and making sure that your personal products are all up to scratch and accurate, rather than relying on a trainer or someone else to sort of help you out in that regards. The sort of ones on the far left there, sort of less support, sort of a similar situation to the lack of contact, I guess, just in the way that because you are sat by yourself, it was in a way quite isolating at times. And whilst you can message and video call and email as much as you want, having that sort of lack of support in person can sometimes be quite challenging for all roles, but also throughout the sort of training period that I had. And there was also a bit of reduced opportunity during the middle of the pandemic. So whilst I was starting my training as a media forecaster, we had a reduced amount of sort of video content that we were putting out on the Met Office YouTube channel. All the stuff that we were doing at weekends was voiceover only. We didn't have any presented work because they weren't bringing any technical staff into the office due to COVID restrictions and sort of social distancing and things like that. So it took me a sort of a full year before all my actual presenter training was completed. So to be able to appear on the Met Office YouTube channel and present on behalf of the Met Office, because it was so stop-start in regards to those COVID restrictions and people just not being able to get into the office. But now things have opened up a bit more. I'm able to do a lot more of that, which I'm very thankful for. So next up, I just thought I'd talk a little bit about sort of the purpose of the Met Office. Really, we were set up by people way back to sort of help save lives, essentially. The sort of first forecasts were all about marine forecasts and shipping to sort of forewarn for storms that were going to be affecting ships, whether they were sailing around our shores or sort of docked offshore as well. And due to some very significant losses of life, it was sort of seen that, really sort of weather forecasting could really prove to be quite beneficial and useful across the UK. Nowadays, whilst sort of forecasters started with sort of minimal work and pen and paper and sort of empirical techniques, the beating heart of the Met Office, shall we say now, is our Cray XC40 supercomputer. So this performs 14,000 trillion calculations per second, and powers all of our model outputs, which is then what is assessed by the chief meteorologist, the deputy chiefs, and it all sort of trickles its way down to us as operational meteorologists as well. We sort of take the guidance that the chief gives us from what he's seeing in the models, and then sort of put that into our forecasts, whether it be for our aviation or media customers. So there has certainly been a lot of improvement in terms of our model, and really a lot of improvement in terms of the accuracy of our forecasts. So now that our 4-day forecast is just as accurate as our 1-day forecast was 30, 40 years ago. This has obviously, helped us forecast storms like a week in advance, like some of the storms we've had recently, Storm Ciarán, Storm Babette. Really, that sort of improved computing power has been a real key player in terms of the Met Office being a world leader in terms of forecasting capabilities. But it's not going to stop there. We do actually have a new supercomputer in the works. So we've joined forces with Microsoft to create this new supercomputer, which once it's up and running is going to be in the top 25 supercomputers in the world. It will be twice as powerful as any other supercomputer in the UK. So really a sort of a leading opportunity from the Met Office to sort of show what our sort of technical capabilities are. Whilst in that previous slide, we were talking about trillions of calculations per second. This new supercomputer is going to be running 60 quadrillion calculations per second, which is, again, another massive step up on where we are currently, and should again really help us be able to ingest so much more data and output so much more forecasts to our various customers out there. So all of this data obviously goes into a number of different products. So we warn people of the extreme weather that is out there so that they can plan their activities safely, sort of really what is at the heart of the Met Office's role. I'm sure you're all aware of the sort of traffic light system of yellow, amber, and red warnings that are issued by the Met Office. These are impact-based warnings, so it's not just that a threshold of such a wind speed is going to be reached, therefore it's going to be an amber warning. There's a lot more intricacy and detail that gets put into deciding on which warning is going to put out, such as time of day. If a windstorm pushes through overnight when everyone is sleeping, then there's sort of reduced number of people actually out and about on the roads, and people will just be that bit safer. Whereas if it's going to hit during either the morning or evening rush hour, when there is a lot of activity outside and a lot of people traveling, then that can lead to heightened impacts. Other things such as what events are on. So during the summer, when you've got festivals on, if there's going to be particular rain events that's going to push right over Glastonbury or right over Leeds or Reading Festival, then sort of being aware of that can really help us put warnings out in force. So we're able to sort of warn people ahead of time that they need to be prepared for potentially a very soggy festival experience. So all those sort of human impacts also go into our warning systems. Other things, we sort of forecast low-level winds in combat zones to support our armed forces campaigns. So as Zoe will mention, we are based at every RAF base across the UK, and we're sort of very intricately linked with the military and the RAF, but that also expands out to international sites as well. So a number of our sort of mobile Met units, the MMU, they go out traveling to sort of war zones where our armed forces are currently present to help forecast for any activities that they have going on them. And then something I've sort of briefly touched on before as well is the sort of Maritime and Coast Guard Agency, with the shipping forecast being the most well-known, and that is the longest running forecast that the Met Office has provided. Has been running ever since the start, when Robert Fitzgerald sort of set the Met Office up to help prevent a loss of life due to significant storm events around coastal areas. So you'll still hear the Met Office produced shipping forecast on BBC Radio 4, and it still goes out routinely every day to help anyone out to sea. And then I guess something that's been building up more recently over the past few decades is the media side of things. So whether it be the website or sort of the app that's been developed, this is Aidan there, one of our presenters, forecasting earlier on this year. There's a much more widespread media presence now in terms of weather forecasting, because here in the UK, the weather is one of our favourite subjects. It's one of the things that we really like to talk about, and so it would be remiss of us really to sort of not join in with that across any social media platforms possible, because obviously our primary focus is to save lives, but if we are not putting the message out in the appropriate places, then there's not really much point to us being there. It's all well and good as doing the shipping forecast and sort of aviation forecast. But if we're not getting that message out to the public, who are essentially our biggest customer, then that's sort of the real key area. So this is where I've sort of mostly been involved with over the past few years now. So in terms of our media forecasting and communication, there are a lot of customers who come to the Met Office for their sort of weather forecasts. So this is a sort of a sample of them. Sort of you'll notice pretty much every UK broadcaster on there, apart from the BBC, who we unfortunately lost the contract with about, I think, sort of 8 years ago or so now. But fingers crossed, when that next come back up, we'll be able to add them to the list as well. So all of these customers take sort of different things from us. The one thing they pretty much all take is that they use our sort of graphics software, which is called Visual Cortex. The program itself, we actually sort of bought in from a New Zealand company who design it, but then we're sort of the next step along the process, and whilst we use it ourselves, we also put it out to our customers as well. So the sort of graphics that you see behind the presenters on ITV, Channel 5 and Channel 4, all of that data is coming through our systems and from our sort of Visual Cortex feed. Our biggest customer nowadays is ITV, and we work very closely with them. So if I am on a media shift any day, the first thing that I essentially have to do in a morning is brief the regional weather presenters on the story for the sort of next 5 days or so. I've got about an hour and a half in the morning when I come in at 7:30 to get the whole story for that 5 days in there, so that I can then brief them from around 9:30 onwards with everything that they need to know. You only get 15 minutes in a brief, and they are sort of back to back, so you can't really overrun, because if you overrun one, you're going to be late for the next one. And in a busy weather week, 15 minutes goes by in a flash. It's not often sort of enough time, really. And also, the sort of things that they're really looking for is the added detail that we can give them. You know, a lot of people and sort of presenters could get up there and say, here is where the cloud is moving, here's some rain over there. But it's more about how the weather is going to make people feel, and what is it going to impact that they really want to know from us. Because that just takes their forecast to the next detail, and it gives their viewers much more information in terms of what they might need to change in their sort of daily schedule because of the weather that is coming through, and how they might need to think about travel things if they do have a particular strong area of wind and rain moving through during a particular rush hour period and things like that. We also brief STV, which is sort of the Scottish version of ITV, and Sky get briefs from us as well. Channel 4 is slightly different in that they don't sort of take proper briefs from us, but Liam Dutton, who is the main presenter there, he sort of gets more of a written sort of guidance from the chief, and he's a trained meteorologist, so he sort of understands all the sort of technical things and is essentially able to sort of self-brief himself. So it is a mixture, but in sort of all locations, really. There's a mixture of some people who are trained meteorologists and sort of know their sort of understanding of the weather, and other people who have come into presenting more from a journalism background or other areas, so they don't know all the technical details of the weather, but they're sort of very good on TV and are able to present it really well. So as long as we can sort of make it more understandable for them, then they're easily able to sort of get that story out as well. Channel 5 is actually one where we produce the forecast for them ourselves. So Claire, who is one of our sort of presenters who works out of Manchester now, she is the main Channel 5 presenter, but she's sort of subcontracted by the Met Office. And then similarly for GB News as well, they essentially employ our weather presenters to present the weather forecasts there. So I've done a few of that, some of those presentations as well. GBC on there, on the left is Gibraltar Broadcasting Company, which Zoe will be able to go into a bit more detail about as well, since she's currently out in Gibraltar. But again, that's a similar situation where our presenters in the Met Office sort of do the presentation, but we actually get the media briefing document from Zoe and the team in Gibraltar, since they are out there and doing the forecasting for the region. And UHMC is actually our most recent customer, and that is the Ukraine broadcaster. They have decided to just sort of take graphics from us, and they use that with their own presenters to then sort of produce now sort of more accurate and more detailed forecasts for customers out there. So I've talked a bit about, obviously, what we give out to our other customers, but there is also in-house presenting in the Met Office. So we have 240,000 subscribers on YouTube now, and a sort of an array of presenters that you'll find on there. And these are the videos that also go onto the Met Office app as well. So you will see me on there occasionally. I'm there in the bottom right corner. The meteorologists at the Met Office, we sort of cover the weekend videos, so you'll probably see me up there on a few weekends covering those. There's the standard sort of evening and afternoon weather that we put out, which goes out every day. But then, we are the Met Office. We really love weather, so we go into a lot more detail on things as well. With sort of the two on the left-hand side, there are 10-day trend and our deep dive are some things that happen once a week. And actually, we find that these longer videos, the deep dive can go on for 20, 30 minutes. A 10-day trend, at least sort of 10 minutes in a lot of things. These longer videos, particularly on YouTube, are some of our most watched videos. We've grown quite a big sort of consumer base, really, I guess, in terms of people who are sort of very interested in the weather, and they're able to come to us to sort of really find out those extra details that you don't always get on sort of traditional weather presented things that you do see on TV, when they've only got a minute and a half or 2 minutes maximum to get the whole story in, when we're able to sort of spend that sort of 15-20 minutes going into things. A lot of people do really appreciate that, and we're able to sort of explain things a bit more, where the uncertainties are lying, show them different model runs, what we're sort of looking at behind the scenes as well, to really sort of guide our forecasts and guide the warnings that we put out as well. There has been this sort of growing trend over the past couple of decades, though, I think, for particularly younger generations. Not a lot of them actually watch sort of dedicated, I guess, TV news and weather presentations anymore, and they get a lot of their information from social media companies. And it is essentially our role to sort of keep up with that and join them in terms of where they are getting their information from. Because, as I said previously, if we're not getting the message out to everyone across the UK, then that is a fault on our part. We have to be able to be out there and making sure that we are raising awareness of any severe weather events that could be heading our way in sort of all the various formats possible. So we have seen this growing social media presence across Facebook, Instagram, sort of X, formerly known as Twitter. That is also that is our main sort of real social media presence at the moment. Sort of over 950,000 followers there. So we do a lot of work on there, and sort of one of my roles in the media services team, in addition to the briefing, is also the production of content that goes out on social media, particularly X. So we have a position called Media Reach, where essentially once we've done a little briefing in the morning, the rest of the day is purely about producing social media content about the weather, and to engage people and really get people interested. I think one of the most engaged social media posts that I have ever personally created would be when we announced the first ever red extreme heat warning for the heat wave in 2022, when the UK reached 40 degrees Celsius for the first time. This was quite a big moment. It sort of dawned on me afterwards what I'd created in terms of announcing this, and yeah, sort of a lot of response to this being the first ever one, and hopefully we were really able to sort of get the message out there whilst there was sort of excess loss of life from that heat wave. It was certainly a severe weather event. The sort of forecast that we were able to put out hopefully really gave people heads up and sort of allow people to take action appropriately because of the presence that we were able to give on various social media channels. Whilst we can forecast, I think it is also important that we also do help a little bit in terms of advice. So also on our social media channels, you'll see things like this, sort of tips for driving in rain or sort of driving in fog and things like that, just to really reiterate how the weather is going to impact people, what things they might need to think about when they are traveling or making any journeys, and things that they might need to change in terms of their speed and how distant they are from the car in front of them and things like that. So I think the two sort of marry up very nicely in terms of that warning system, but also putting out advice as well. And when the weather isn't so serious, it is important that people don't necessarily want to be lectured at all the time. So just to get involved in the glorious aspect of what is the UK weather. So we do these sort of more light-hearted things every now and again, our sort of weekend polls and sort of showing photographs of the gorgeous weather that we do have around the UK, using hashtag #LoveUKWeather. So if you have any good snapshots, then do make sure you're using that hashtag on social media, and we might just share some of them across us as well. The other aspect sort of that has really picked up most recently has been TikTok and Instagram Reels, and the ability to create entertaining and informative content. Again, this is sort of reaching new generations, that sort of Gen Z criteria, who sort of really don't even look at Facebook or sort of X as much as other generations do. We've got to be able to be there and sort of reaching all grounds, really. And this sort of video content has really evolved over the past couple of years or so, and it's been something that I've increasingly got involved with this year in particular as well. So I've just got 3 examples of some of the things that we've put out on our sort of TikTok channels, just to show the variety of things and how you can have this informative content that is also engaging and entertaining and sort of really grips people as well. So this first one is actually, this is the bit I'm going to have to reshare my screen just so that you can actually hear what's going on. This first one is just about hurricanes and how we there was a bit of misinformation about whether a hurricane was going to be hurtling towards the UK. So we just shared a video in regards to that to inform people about exactly what was happening.
Is the UK about to get hit by a hurricane? The simple answer is no. Hurricanes are fueled by the warm waters of tropical oceans, with temperatures of at least 27 degrees Celsius. And as anyone who's been swimming in the seas around the UK will tell you, it's certainly not that warm here. However, the UK will be influenced by ex-hurricanes. As hurricanes travel northwards over the colder waters of the North Atlantic, they weaken and undergo an extratropical transition. This is where they lose their hurricane status and transform into something more akin to the areas of low pressure that the UK sees so frequently throughout the year. In some instances, they just decay away completely, but sometimes they get picked up by the jet stream and given one last breath of life and transported closer towards the UK. This is what happened to the area of low pressure that's currently around the UK during the middle of this week. It was formed by the remnants of Hurricane Lee. And Hurricane Nigel, which is currently out in the Atlantic, is also forecast to travel northwards, undergo its extratropical transition, and help to bring another spout of wet and windy weather to the UK for some this weekend. Raincoats at the ready.
A rare red weather warning has just been issued by us here at the Met Office. It's for rain for parts of eastern Scotland on Thursday and Friday. Well over a month's worth of rain is expected to fall in just over a day, and significant flooding is anticipated. Storm Babette will cause other issues across many parts of the UK with wind and rain for the next several days. Please check the Met Office app and website for the latest details of the warnings and how the storm could affect where you are. And please also share this and follow us for the latest updates.
Halloween is upon us, and there's nothing like some spooky weather to really set the mood. But how much do you know about these fiendish phenomena? Here's a devilish quiz to test your knowledge. Nothing adds a sense of terror quite like thunder and lightning, but where is the most lightning-struck place in the entire world? This location sees thunderstorms developing on around 150 nights of the year, and that is Lake Maracaibo in Venezuela. Must be quite a spectacle for the fish. Fog really helps set that eerie atmosphere, but what distance does the visibility have to drop below before we officially term it fog? If the visibility is higher than this value, we would call it mist, but it's fog when you can see no more than 1,000 meters in front of you. And be wary of particularly dense fog that could be hiding a multitude of monsters. Hello? The full moon brings out some of our scariest creatures, but in which month of the year is the full moon called the wolf moon? Named this by ancient settlers who heard the howling wolves during this particular month, and that is January. So even after Halloween is over, keep your wits about you, because you never know who may be holding on to a secret.
Right, thought I'd just go through all three of them rather than me resharing and sharing my screen back again all the time. Yeah, that's just a few examples of the different things that we have put out, really. You can have that engaging content, but really getting the message out there, as that middle one showed, in regards to the sort of red warning that was issued, and then that last one with the Halloween quiz was one of my favorites ones that I've put together, really. It was very fun to do, and just sort of having that sort of weather theme sort of attached to specific events, sort of jumping on trends can be really important as well. So that's been sort of my time at the Met Office, really. So thank you very much for listening.
Thanks, Jonathan. I did really badly in that last quiz. We've got a question in the Q&A, so I'll ask that now. They've asked, can impact-based warning be verified if it's not only based on thresholds?
It can, yes. So there's a channel in our sort of background rooms that is all about impact reporting. Sorry, is my complete screen gone blurry? I'm not sure why that's happened. Let me stop this video and restart it again if that does anything. Nope. Okay, sorry about that. Well, it's the ghost of that Halloween video. So yeah, essentially, there's teams within the Met Office that are constantly scouring through social media, police reports for potential impacts that have happened due to the weather events that we've been warning for. So they will then take those and verify it against the warning that we've issued, in terms of whether they feel the impacts that occurred were appropriate to the level of the warning that we put out, and our response in terms of even in terms of getting the message out there as well, whether it was an appropriate level for what people were actually experiencing on the ground itself. So yeah, that's sort of the verification method that we go through.
Thanks. I'm just conscious of time, but there's another question for you from Brendan in the chat. Maybe if you want to type a response there, and we might move on to Zoe, if that's all right.
Sure, yeah.
Okay, so Zoe has been at the Met Office for about 5 years, I believe. And as Jonathan mentioned, she started in an aviation background as well, and now works in Gibraltar. So Zoe, if you'd like to unmute and show your video, I'll hand over to you.
Hi, Regan. Thank you. Yes, I'll just share my screen with everyone. Let me know if you can see that. Hopefully it's working.
Yeah.
Brilliant. So thank you, Jonathan. Thank you, everyone, for having us. Thank you, Jonathan, for that interesting insight into what your life is like as a media forecaster. So as he has alluded to, I work primarily in defence. I joined the office 5 years ago. Similar thread to Jonathan, I joined direct entrance into the OMFC, the Meteorological Foundation course, and then went on to become a trainee and then qualify in the defence atmosphere. Just a bit about my background though. So I started off with a maths degree from Swansea University. I wasn't really sure, like Jonathan, what to do, what I wanted to do with my career and my future. So I thought maths is a fairly solid degree to get. With that, I did explore opportunities in the finance world. Quite quickly learned that it wasn't for me. And so I decided that going on to complete a master's degree was probably a better use of my time. So I applied for the MSc in Atmosphere, Ocean and Climate Dynamics at Reading University. It was at the point that I was researching different master's degrees that I kind of really got an idea of meteorology and that actually it's something that I do quite enjoy. Apart from maths, I don't have a particularly scientific background, but I would say that hasn't held me back at all. I've really enjoyed becoming a bit more of a scientist through doing this degree and then through getting the job in the Met Office. So I applied whilst I was finishing my degree and I joined in the autumn of 2018. And I was just going to give a little bit of information about the application process. If there are any of you who are currently looking at applying for a job in the Met Office, there's just a few tips from someone who's done it on how to make your application as successful as it can be. So to find jobs, I would recommend first going to the Met Office website directly for vacancies, or as well on the Our Met Society website. Any availability, any roles that are coming up will be advertised there. They will also be on other job adverts, so places like LinkedIn and Indeed.com. The Met Office will advertise roles there. The application itself, it starts off with a written application. And my tips for this is to think about the essential criteria that will be detailed in the job advert. This is just a snip from the most recent operational meteorologist role that was advertised. The Met Office require a cover letter with your CV, and these essential qualifications aren't just for you to assess if you're suitable for the role, but it's for us to assess as well. So really read them and try and refer to them in your cover letter, as we can then see how you would fit into the role and how you would fit into the office environment as well. Following the success of a written application, then there is the interview, which at the moment are held on Teams. They are remote. You're not required to travel or come down to Exeter for those interviews. And because they're on Teams, I would recommend you make sure your IT is working. It can be really stressful, just that interview process in general. So to try and make it a little bit less stressful for you, make sure your IT is working. It also makes it a bit less difficult for the interviewing panel as well. At this point, I would say, remember, we want you to do well. If you've got through the written application, there's a good chance you're very qualified and very capable of doing the job. This is just your opportunity to prove it to us, and we are supporting you. And we do really want you to get the job if you are able. Following the interview, then there will come the job offer. Just so you know, a lot of people will be applying with a scientific background. We know you've got the relevant qualifications. You'll get the job offer if you can show us how you'll fit into the organisation, what makes you unique. We're really interested in hearing about your degrees and about your thesis, but we're as interested in hearing about you, about your personality, about your interests, and everything else that make you the unique individual that you are. Following that, so joining the Met Office as an operational meteorological technician or as a trainee forecaster, you have to go through a training process to become a qualified meteorologist. So this is the current plan at the moment. You join the office as an OpMet Tech, an operational meteorological technician. You first have to get your aeronautical meteorological observing qualification, or your AMO. This is a 2 to 4 week course, which essentially gives you all the skills you need to become an observer, to go outside and quite literally observe the weather. Once you've succeeded in getting that qualification, you go on to become an OpMet technician. Mostly these are based at our defence site, so we do have a few in Exeter as well. And as an OpMet technician, you'll be completing routine observations, supporting the OpMets within the office, being exposed to a military or a civilian environment, and just getting to grips with the kind of office environment and being exposed to the weather in a new way that you might not have experienced before. Following on from being an OpMet Tech, that's roughly 6 to 18 months. It varies and it's a constantly evolving role. But you do then move on to your Operational Meteorological Foundation course. This is, as Jonathan mentioned, essentially the basics of being a forecaster. I won't repeat too much as Jonathan's already discussed it with you. But following the success of this course, you will then become a trainee operational meteorologist. To qualify, you will be assessed by your colleagues, by your peers, so by OpMets who work at the station where you are based. They will give you an aeronautical meteorological forecasting qualification. There will be a series of assessment days, just watching you do your job, watching you be a forecaster, and when they deem you to be competent and capable of being released by yourself as an OpMet, they will qualify you, and then you are a qualified operational meteorologist. Nobody can take that qualification away from you. It will be renewed every 5 years or so, but it's not as intense the 5th time coming around as it is the first. Once you've learned how to do the job, the fundamentals of it never really change. As with Jonathan, my entry was slightly different. I came straight into the Operational Meteorological Foundation course, so I just went from being on the OMFC to being a trainee to being a qualified OpMet, and I joined in 2018. So I qualified just before the COVID pandemic in 2020. So this was a little bit of my route. I joined and I did the training in Exeter for the OMFC. I then did my on-the-job training at MOD Boscombe Down, which is based in Wiltshire, and then qualified in January 2020. Some of the challenges along the way for me, there's a little bit of overlap, but because of when I applied and when I did my training, I was required to move to Exeter for the OMSC. This is now being largely done online. There is some requirement for you to spend a couple of weeks in Exeter, but generally speaking, it's online. So there's not the same requirement as there used to be. But for me, it did mean that I had to move around the country quite a lot just to get qualified. Also, due to the nature of people applying to the Met Office, there's a real range of different backgrounds, which can be a huge strength in a team, but it can also be quite frustrating or quite challenging in a training environment. There were individuals who'd come straight from a bachelor's degree in physics or maths and had no exposure to meteorology. And then there were those who'd done a 4 years integrated masters at Reading who knew just about everything you could know at that stage in meteorology. So there was quite a gap to bridge for the first few months before we all caught up and got up to speed with each other. I will say it's quite a high workload as well. It's a Monday to Friday, 9 to 5, but it's 9 to 5 learning. So in your free time and at your weekends, you kind of have to consolidate that learning to make sure you really know your stuff before you go on to qualify. During the AMO itself, and for anyone who does get posted to an RAF or military base, it quite often is their first time working or just being on a military base. So there's an adjustment needed to a different style of living, a different style of working. But it is unique and it is quite special. You really are involved and embedded with your customers, so you can get to know them on quite a personal level. There are also different methods at different sites. I will touch on it in just a moment, but the way that you train once you're going through your operational meteorologist training, so post doing the OMFC and just doing the on-the-job training, you're being trained by OpMets. So the benefits of that is that they're people who do this job. They know exactly what to do. They know exactly how to help you and how to explain things to you so that you understand them. But it does mean that there are different methods at different sites. No one person teaches in the same way. So it will be varied across where you are based. There is also the challenge of different bases having different opening hours. I was quite fortunate at Boscombe. We worked a Monday to Friday, earlys and lates shift run. So I would see the same people every day of the week. So I had a little bit of consistency in that sense. On the flip side, there are stations such as Lossiemouth or RAF Coningsby where they work a 24/7 roster. So if you're unlucky, you might not see the same person for up to 2 weeks at a time just because your shifts are completely different. And that means that whilst you see more people and you get a bit more rounded training from different people who work in different ways, it does mean that occasionally your training can be a little bit stilted just because you've not got that consistency of people. With that, everyone's training at a different station. Everybody does learn and train differently as well. So you might qualify at a different time to the rest of your peer group. That can be a bit challenging. It's easy to compare yourself, but we are all different. We will learn at different paces. And it's just a case of waiting it through. I'd say it doesn't take any more than 3 to 6 months to qualify once you're in that training environment. So don't be too put off if you're seeing some of your colleagues and peers qualifying slightly sooner than you are. It just means that we all work differently. And finally, there will be a requirement to move to your OJT posting. So whilst the initial OMFC training is online, the actual training to become a forecaster will be based at a station. Unfortunately, from a training perspective, as Jonathan touched on with the COVID pandemic, it's not easy doing it remotely. And if you are forecasting for a station, you do really need to be there to witness the weather firsthand as you're forecasting it. So there will be some requirement to move during your time as a trainee. Benefits, though, of course, of working at the Met Office. The qualification itself is globally recognised. On my OMFC, there were 6 individuals from different countries who had been sent there by their employers just to get that qualification, just to say, I have been trained to be a forecaster by the Met Office. It is an internationally recognised qualification and it is highly esteemed. The training itself is provided by ex-forecasters, so the actual team that make up the People Development Centre have all worked in operational meteorology at some point in their time, so there's no one better to teach operational meteorology than the people that do it, so that's a huge benefit of training and qualifying with the Met Office. And then as an employee, as you've already seen with Jonathan, there is so much opportunity to move into different departments, different offices, and different areas of meteorology itself. You can keep on forecasting, but based on who you're doing it for, the requirement from you is completely different. So you'll hear in just a minute how that's been different for me in defence. There are also other opportunities to move into leadership and management, which I'll touch on in a little bit as well. But there is so much support within the Met Office for you to really explore, see what you're interested in, see what you want to try before you commit to it full time. And it's never too late to make a sideways move if you want to try something different. So some of the skills that I'd say are quite important for being an operational meteorologist. You do need to be quite detail oriented. The weather is quite specific at times, and it can also be quite vague at other times. It does what it wants. It's completely it can be completely unreliable, and with that you need to be able to really recognize what detail is relevant to your customer. For me, in defense and in aviation, I'm really interested in upper atmosphere, wind speeds, wind directions, but what I'm communicating to the aviation customers will be completely different to the public media presentations and briefings that Jonathan will be providing for the public, because they're interested in different elements of the weather. That being said, you do also need to be able to assess the effect of your choices and the impact of what you're saying. For example, if there's really, really bad weather, if it's really wet and really rainy, people probably aren't too interested in the temperatures that day if it's going to be, unless it's going to be particularly cold. So it's kind of identifying what the most impactful parts of the weather are and being able to communicate that effectively. Meteorologists all work as a team. I think in just about every office, every team within the Met Office, there is at least 2 or 3 people working together. So you do need to have quite good teamwork and interpersonal skills. That goes beyond your colleagues as well. You are often briefing to customers and providing written documents, written forecasts for the customers. So you do need to have good written and verbal communication skills as well. With that comes a requirement to be able to time manage and prioritize. This kind of links with the next one about being able to work under pressure. In that image, you can see it's quite a big thunderstorm affecting the area just in that image there. You need to work under pressure. Thunderstorms can be forecast, they can be tracked, and they can be seen to be coming as they approach an area, but they also can pop up out of the blue, really depending on the synoptic situation. So the ability to kind of react to the weather, work under that pressure of saying, okay, this is what's happening now. I need to prioritize the weather right now and look at putting some of these Outlook products or some admin products a bit later in the day is really quite an important skill to have. And with that comes time management and prioritization, recognizing what the most important tasks are that day. And finally, with operational meteorology, you do need to have a willingness to travel, not necessarily to travel quite a long way to work, but based on where the locations are within the UK. If it's not somewhere that's immediately local to you, there might be a requirement for you to move if this really is a job that you want to pursue, but also to work unsocial hours. I've already mentioned some 24/7 stations, and that does quite literally mean first thing on a Monday morning to the last thing on a Sunday night, and you could be required to work any shift within that time. That being said, it does come with its own rewards as well. You might have to work weekends, but you would get days off in the week, which gives you a little bit more freedom and flexibility within your own personal life as well. So I work predominantly in aviation. I trained at MOD Boscombe Down. I now work at an airfield in Gibraltar. I've worked at other airfields along the way as well. And there are some key products that I'd say are quite consistent through all of the defence aviation sites that I've worked at. Just a few of these I will briefly touch on with you. So the first is a cross-section. This is a really typical example of a forecast we would provide to any of our RAF customers. It's almost a time snipped shot of the day, of detailing the cloud, how you expect the cloud to develop through the day. So starting on this one at 7Z in the morning, all the way through to 17 in the afternoon, early evening time. And in there is a detail of exactly what you think the weather is going to do that day. Some stations, it's becoming a little bit less common these days, but we do also produce something called an area forecast. It's a very similar product. It's essentially containing the same information, but written out. Some customers prefer to read the weather, or they would be more interested in an area rather than a specific location. So the cross section on the left is specifically for Boscombe Down Airfield, whereas the area forecast on the right is, as it's detailed in the top, Gibraltar and sea areas with 20 kilometres. So it's a much wider area. You can give more detail on where exactly different weather will be affecting within that area of the area forecast. And as Jonathan touched on, we do write a TAF for all of our aviation sites as well. So that's a terminal aerodrome forecast. It's basically the weather forecast written in code and using different color codes and color states to kind of identify good and bad weather, good being blue, bad being red, and then every color in between. It's a message mostly for pilots. It helps them understand forecast weather and current weather at a site, and they can look at different ones from all across the globe quite quickly, just to get an idea of weather that might be affecting them on their arrival or departure from a airfield. We also do quite a lot of marine forecasting as well. Jonathan's touched on the shipping forecast. In defence, we do our own versions of these, so specifically at overseas locations. So on the left, Gibraltar, just in the south of Iberia, and also Mare Harbour. Mare Harbour is a location in the Falkland Islands, which is in the South Atlantic. So the shipping forecast written by the OPMETs in Exeter is for the UK only. So being a site in Gibraltar or the Falklands where there are also Navy presences, there's a the Naval are present in Gibraltar and other overseas sites, we are required to produce a maritime forecast for them. It's very similar to the aviation forecast, but it looks at slightly different parts of the atmosphere. So with aviation and aircraft, you're looking at winds aloft, you're looking at strengths and directions of winds at, say, 10 or 20,000 feet. Whereas with the ships, you're more interested in sea states, swells, and wind wave heights. So we just use our knowledge of the atmosphere and of the oceans to communicate the weather, focusing on slightly different parameters and slightly different areas of interest to be relevant for our customer. And finally, as Jonathan has spoken plenty about, we do have an element of public weather forecasting in defence as well. So at some sites, this will be the case looking more of a daily weather report, so a written forecast. As you can see, this one is for Boscombe Down, gives a synoptic chart and then brief overview in public weather terminology. We're not interested in winds aloft. We're not interested in temperatures aloft. We're focusing on the here and now, what weather is going to affect you going about your day-to-day life. And we provide a media script for radio stations as well. We have a contract with BFBS, the British Forces Broadcasting Station, and twice a day in Gibraltar and once a day in Cyprus and the Falklands, we go on air and we give that radio brief to the general public. Again, we're thinking about impacts that will affect you living your day-to-day life, just going about your way. Is it going to rain? Is it going to be foggy? Is it going to be windy? So one of the key requirements at a defence site is the observations. This is why you obtain your AMO qualification. There I am in Cyprus doing an observation on a rather wet day. So what do? We monitor and we observe the weather. It's as simple as that. The purpose of that is to support operational aircraft to and from the airfield where you are based, but also to support the wider network. So, for example, based at Boscombe Down in Wiltshire, if we've got weather coming in from the southwest, it's really useful to us to look at stations in the southwest, such as Culdrose, Exeter, and Yeovilton, who are upstream from Boscombe Down, to see what weather is affecting them and to see what kind of weather we can expect in the coming coming hours as that frontal system approaches. So it's real nowcasting rather than forecasting, but it's much more useful because we can identify this is what the weather is doing. There we can expect it to carry that through to us, or we can use our local knowledge to kind of infer, okay, we're slightly higher, it might be slightly poorer, that kind of thing. We also have to react and respond to changes in the weather, performing special observations when required. This is so that we are providing the most up-to-date weather that we can to air traffic control and subsequently to the pilots who are inbound and outbound. This is particularly important on busy days, busy weather days. So when it's raining, when there are showers, when there's a risk of thunderstorms, we have to be really on the ball, looking out the window and communicating any changes that are relevant to operational aircraft. And finally, on a more long-term project, the data and the observations that we do, they all filter into climate statistics for a station. So last year, for example, the warmest day on record at RAF Coningsby, that was only able to be recorded and reported because we store these climate statistics. We complete these observations, and it's not just temperature, it could be winds, it could be gusts, it could be low temperatures as well as high temperatures. And it just helps us to have an idea of climate statistics. This then feeds into annual statistics, and that supports climate scientists and looking at climate change moving forward. So where are we in the world? From a forecasting perspective, these are pretty much all of the stations you can expect to be based at in the UK. We've got Exeter HQ and Aberdeen. They are the two civilian bases, but the rest are all RAF bases, Army bases, or MOD bases. As you can see, quite a spread across the country, a little bit heavy in the south, but you have got opportunities to live further north or in Scotland or Ireland or Wales if you would prefer. So where have I been? I started off at MOD Boscombe Down, which is part of the MOD Kinetic team. Now, there are three main sites in the Kinetic team where there is Met Office presence. Boscombe Down in Wiltshire, Aberporth in Cardigan in West Wales, and South Uist in the Outer Hebrides. By being based at Boscombe Down, I was required to work at all three of these sites, so I would go on detachment to West Wales or the South Uist from time to time to support our customers as they required. When they had trials and operations going on, we were there to support. Additionally, though, we do provide remote support for other Kinetic sites, Shoeburyness in Essex, Pendine in southwest Wales, Eskmeals and West Frew as well. This is for acoustics forecasting. These are also Kinetic sites where they're testing bombs and explosions, and we provide forecasts to give them an idea of how that sound is going to propagate as a result of the explosion, just to see if they are within their limits of noise pollution. And if they are exceeding those limits of noise pollution, we have to advise them, sorry, it will be too loud, you can't do it today, the population will hear you, you'll get complaints. So there's MOD Boscombe Down. The main customer at Boscombe Down is the Empire Test Pilot School. So Boscombe Down is a site where pilots test aircraft to the extent of their capabilities. So a Chinook, for example, is a multi-rotor helicopter, and they will have limits on wind strengths that they can fly in. I think off the top of my head, 18 knots, gusting 28 knots is their limit. They cannot fly if it is stronger than that, the wind. They only have these limits because somebody has tested it and found that something bad happens when they go over that wind limit. And that's what they do at Boscombe Down. They test these aircraft, they test them in their extremes of weather. They also test them for new innovation, new technologies, and it's also an opportunity for them to train pilots to become these test pilots. The people within this in the school, they'll have already done, say, 15 to 30 years in the RAF or in a respective military from whichever country they have come from. They'll go to the Empire Test Pilot School at Boscombe Down and train to become a test pilot. They'll train to push aircraft to their limits. During my time, some of the key things that happened at Boscombe Down in COVID 2020, we were the host for the repatriation flights. So all of those passengers who were on the ships, on the cruise ships in the Middle East and to the east of Australia and China, they were flown back over to the UK, and before going into quarantine, they had to land somewhere, and Boscombe Down was the site for that. So we were very busy during that time. In 2021, we hosted the Rolls-Royce Spirit of Innovation aircraft. This is the fastest all-electric aircraft in the world. We were forecasting for them. They were operating in and out of Boscombe Down. It was quite exciting being able to forecast for such a unique aircraft that was all-electric, and perhaps it is the way forward for future aircraft, though I think there's still a little way to go yet. And finally, in 2022, we were the host of the Black Eagles, which is the South Korean Air Force display team. Essentially the Red Arrows, but from South Korea. They were really interesting. They were not used to the UK weather. Coming from South Korea, they were used to hot and humid conditions, damp, but still fairly warm. They came over in June, July time in 2022, and they were cold. They did not enjoy the summer weather in the UK, but they really enjoyed being at Boscombe Down and having the opportunity to partake in lots of the air shows. So in Riyadh, in the Farnborough Air Show, and in the Tattoo that year. I've also mentioned Aberporth. I've worked there from time to time. This is a view from the range. It's absolutely beautiful over in West Wales on a good day, but the weather can be unsettling as well. You can have thick fog coming in across the bay due to it being a coastal site. That's quite common. You can also have very strong winds, especially as we get those storms coming up during the autumn months. If they come up through the Irish Sea, Aberporth will get some very, very high winds. What do we do there though? So we do range work mainly over the sea. So rather than testing aircraft to their limits, customers in Aberporth and in South Uist are testing aircraft for their missile capabilities. So they will be trialling perhaps a new weapon, or they'll be trialling a new aircraft with a different weapon, just to see what its capabilities are, and sometimes to train their pilots as well. There's a lot of air-to-sea missile testing, quite a big area of sea in the Cardigan Bay for them to do that missile testing, and we're there to support, giving them weather updates as they need them. Other customers there, fast jets, practicing their bombing, practicing different methods of doing bombing, so using laser ammunition to get their targets more accurate, that kind of thing. And also it has been quite popular with USV and UAV trials. So a USV is an unmanned sea vehicle, UAV unmanned aerial vehicle. So essentially a drone, either in the sea or in the air. And that's being controlled by somebody on the ground, and they're using that drone to see if they can continue with their missile testing without actually being on the vessel itself. So quite a lot of innovative things going on over in Aberporth and in the South Uist ranges as well. This is South Uist, again, another beautiful spot, picked because of its location to the sea, specifically to the Atlantic. The biggest event that goes on in South Uist is the Formidable Shield, which is a biennial event, so every 2 years, and it is a NATO-organised international missile testing operation. So the RAF and different military aircraft military from all over the world come together if they are a member of NATO just to test their missiles. It's called ballistic missile testing, which is essentially a missile that goes up at the same rate that it then comes down on the other side, and they've got an enormous expanse of water to do that testing in. That's why these places have been selected. They can go and they can practice with their ammunition, they can practice with their aircraft as much as they want. They're not affecting the public, they're not over land, they're not a threat to anybody. So finally, the kinetic ranges. This is Pendine. As I mentioned, we do acoustic forecasting for the kinetic ranges. We are remote for these. We rarely go to visit them, but it's an online service that we provide just to give them an idea of the impacts of that their explosions will cause. So advising them how loud it will be and if they should do it or not, based on the wind direction and the atmospheric conditions, to identify the level of noise interference that it will cause. Here's just a couple more pictures of the kinetic ranges. As I say, they are mostly based along the shore. They've got some really stunning views. These are all on good days. Of course, the weather can be quite bad. You can get pretty bad thunderstorms, fog, strong winds, everything you'd expect at a coastal site. There are other opportunities to detach within the UK if you are interested. Some of the more interesting ones: Wimbledon, Commonwealth, Riyadh, which is an air show in the UK, the Gulf Open every year. But there are also other opportunities that are seasonal. So during the winter months, you can move to work for Highways England or Scottish Highways, and that's focusing on winter hazards during October to March time. Finally, a new, fairly recent opportunity is the testbed opportunities, which are looking at new technologies and new capabilities for forecasters. You can detach for 3 to 6 months just to look at that and see if it's a viable future technology that we should be investing in for our forecasters. Now, a huge part of my role as a defence opmet has been moving overseas. Just a few of the opportunities and challenges that I faced in my time. There's so many benefits to going overseas. You have the opportunity to travel paid for by work, which is excellent. You can go to some really unique places. So Gibraltar, you can get to on a plane from the UK, but other places such as Cyprus, Akrotiri, and the Falkland Islands as well, Ascension Islands, and also St. Helena, to 3 islands in the Atlantic, which generally are very expensive to get to if you're paying your own way. But for work, as a work opportunity, it's really quite a unique one. You can expand your meteorological knowledge beyond typical North Atlantic weather systems. So the same theory applies, but because we haven't got the same influences in places like Gibraltar and the Falkland Islands, everything is slightly different. It's subtly changed, and you need to spend some time getting used to the slightly different area to really be able to implement those empirical techniques you would learn in your forecasted training course. You would also meet a lot of different colleagues. There's so much to be learnt from working with people who have had different experiences and different backgrounds. And I think by moving overseas and spending time overseas, you'll meet so many more people, and you can share your skills, you can share your experience, but you can also learn from them as well. There's a lot of flexibility with overseas detachments, typically 3 to 6 months for a short tour. But I am at the moment on a long tour, so I'll be in Gibraltar for 2 to 3 years. So there's choices as well. If you didn't want to commit for too long a time, you can go for just that shorter window of 3 or 6 months. And due to the remoteness and the challenging aspect of the role, there is financial incentive as well. With that in mind, there are, of course, challenges. You're away from home, you're away from your support network, you are also away from guidance support as well. So the guidance is phenomenal in the UK, but if you move overseas, it does get gradually smaller. The model availability is also less, so you have to rely a little bit more on your skills as an empirical forecaster rather than model output. The model is getting better, but it doesn't cover every area to the same resolution, so it's not quite as accurate in more remote sites. They are also high pressure environments overseas. If we are overseas with the RAF, it's because it's an operationally active environment, particularly Cyprus. It's a very high pressure work environment because of the nature of the work, but also places like the Falklands, they are on a ready state. Just in case anything were to happen, the military maintain their presence there. And because the military maintain their presence there, we are there to support them as well. So just a few pictures to finish off. So I've been in Gibraltar this year since February. I was also here in 2020 as an operational meteorologist. We get a lot of good weather in the summer, some really sunny, clear days, but we do also get some fairly poor weather as well. So today, for example, it's been raining since about 6 o'clock yesterday evening, and it's not stopped. We do also struggle with fog. Being a remote site, being a maritime site, we're on a peninsula sticking it into the Mediterranean. It's quite a humid place. So when the humidity rises and we start to see temperature rises becoming temperatures of the sea being more close to temperatures of the land, we can quite quickly see fog forming in the bay and then very quickly moving right across the runway. It's a very unique place as well, as in the runway completely cuts off the rest of Gibraltar. Recently, we have had a tunnel built so you can drive under the runway, but you can walk across the runway. And that shot on the left was taken looking down the runway, so looking out to the east as the fog was coming in. It's quite a unique phenomenon that we have in Gibraltar as well. The winds in Gibraltar are either poniente from the west or levante from the east, and this is what we call a levante cloud. I'll just play a short video while I explain its formation. So this is a time lapse. In an easterly, temperatures are more humid typically, and we have a lot of humidity coming towards the rock from the east. Now, the height of the rock is about 1,500 feet, and it forces the air upwards. As the air rises, it condenses and produces this cloud at the top of the rock. This cloud then promulgates over the top of the rock and then creates a kind of oscillating effect, and we call that a levante cloud. It's amazing to see develop, and it can linger all day. There's so many pictures and videos online of it. We also have a Twitter presence in Gibraltar, and we've had a few videos go up as well. So if you are interested in seeing some more of those, or perhaps in better quality, feel free to do so. So that's just one of the local effects of Gibraltar. We do, as I say, as Jonathan mentioned, we have the GBC contract. So there on the left, I am giving an interview regarding a rainfall event we had in September this year. And we provide that BFBS forecast to the BFBS forecast for the public as well. So on the radio, and there I am on the right to giving a radio forecast too. So lots going on in Gibraltar. We've got aviation, we've got maritime, and we've got public weather as well, all in the sunny south of Spain. There are wildlife. There's a lot of wildlife at all of the overseas locations, particularly in Gibraltar, the Barbarian macaques. You're not really supposed to touch them, but they are quite friendly. They'll jump on your head for a selfie. They've got very familiar with the people. Generally, they don't bother you as long as you don't bother them, unless you've got food, and then they want to steal it. Other places I've worked, RAF Mount Pleasant Complex. This is the Falklands. I went to the Falklands as SMETO. So this is one of the development opportunities I was referring to earlier. I moved down there as the SMETO, which is the manager of the station. So I was managing the team of OPMETs. I was also managing some of the day-to-day activities throughout my detachment there as well. The weather in the Falklands can be harsh, especially in the winter months. Being in the south, we've got the opposite seasons to in the northern hemisphere, so it can be quite hard to get people interested in going during the southern hemisphere winter, because that is the poorest time to be there, but also it's the best time to be in the UK and in the northern hemisphere. But it's a really unique place. Everything is slightly different because it's the southern hemisphere. Forces work slightly differently, so your general understanding of low and high pressure systems has been flipped upside down. In the northern hemisphere, you'd expect a low pressure to rotate anti-clockwise cyclonically. In the southern hemisphere, cyclonic means clockwise. Your low pressure system will be going in the other direction. So there's a few quirks to get used to if you are to go down to the south, but it's really rewarding. We also create and collect observations and data in the Falklands too. On the left is the Met enclosure. So those are just some of our equipment to store that data for us. And on the right, a Campbell-Stokes sunshine recorder. One of the few places to still have a manual one. A lot of them have been replaced with automatic sensors, but it's just not feasible in the Falklands. We can't get people down to repair equipment as easily as we can in the UK. So a lot more of the things are done by hand there. It's also one of the few places we still launch a weather balloon. So here I am launching a weather balloon, or a radiosonde, if you like. It's a weather balloon. It goes up through the atmosphere and we get an atmospheric profile of weather conditions. So wind, temperature, dew point, and it gives us an idea of how the atmosphere is behaving at that time. It's modelled to us in the form of a tephigram. If you're not familiar, here is one. This is Camborne from this morning. And just from looking at that, I'm getting the idea, and considering I'm not in the UK, I'm not entirely sure, but it looks like there's some patchy low clouds up to probably around 5,000 or 6,000 feet, a bit of a gap, and then a layer of medium and a high cloud as well. So these are really useful. These are one of the most useful tools that we have as forecasters to get an actual accurate representation of the atmosphere and how it's behaving. We can infer just from this tephogram if we can expect thunderstorms, if we can expect sunshine, if we can expect fog. They are the most useful thing that we have to look at. Again, wildlife in the Falklands, it's probably the best place I've ever been. If you are an outdoors type person and you're interested in wildlife, I would highly recommend to go there if you can. David Attenborough has used it and the islands surrounding the Falklands for quite a lot of his Planet Earth documentaries, and it's really quite something to behold. So you've got everything from king penguins to seals to elephant seals, rockhopper penguins. You've also got white-billed albatross, gentoo penguins. They're so friendly. You can get just about everything. I think one of my fondest memories was a trip to see some penguins on a boat, and then on the boat we were surrounded by a pod of orcas who were just curious to see what we were doing, and there's nothing quite like it. Finally, I've also spent some time in RAF Akrotiri. Akrotiri is in Cyprus. It's a very operational environment. You are supporting Navy, Army, RAF, and you've got some media public presence there as well. So as a senior operational meteorologist, this is an opportunity you can take to become a more qualified, more experienced forecaster. It's got its own challenges. In the summer, it's very hot. You're looking at mid to high 30s in temperatures, but the weather's fairly settled. At this time, you're more interested in looking at weather further afield. So the kind of customers that we are forecasting for, they are operating out of Akrotiri and into the Middle East or other areas where there is operational requirement within the UK. So you need to be more switched on with your global forecasting at this point. You're not just forecasting for Cyprus, you're looking at the locations where they're going. In the summer, it can be a little bit more straightforward. You've got generally good weather, especially in the Middle East, but in the winter, it can be quite challenging. Thunderstorms can pop up out of nowhere. I recall one evening, I think we were in a thunderstorm for almost 8 or 9 hours, and the shifts there are quite tasking as well. So in that 8 or 9 hours, I was on shift by myself, and it was overnight. So it was quite a tiring shift. Had to be switched on, communicating the risks and the updates to the air traffic control guys as they happened. So I'll just sum up with two of the development courses that I've taken whilst in the last 5 years as an OpMet. So, of course, as a forecasting professional development, I started as a forecaster. I've gone on to get additional accreditations. I am RQF qualified, which is another form of meteorological qualification. I've also got an RMET, which is something you can do once you become a forecaster. Following on from those, I've attended different masterclasses and different CPD sessions to continue improving my own abilities. That has prepared me to go to overseas environments and take on more challenging roles. And then that led to a promotion to a senior operational meteorologist. And moving forward with that experience behind me, I can move on to explore other opportunities in other teams. And the other option that I have sort of started to experience and explore a little bit more is moving into leadership and management. So my detachment to the Falklands was to be a manager, to get that leadership experience, to get that leadership training. I've taken that back with me to the UK and to Gibraltar and other sites I've been at, and I've started to lead on other internal projects. There's so much to get involved with if you are interested in leading and managing in another way, and you can stay forecasting whilst you do that. There's plenty of support, and you're encouraged to get involved as much as you can, if that's being on an interview panel, leading an interview panel, or instigating your own projects and working groups for the future as well. There are opportunities to get a chartered meteorologist accreditation as well. I've not quite started on mine yet. It's quite a long process, but it's definitely worth doing. And that's everything from me. If there are any questions, thank you.
Thanks, Zoe. And yes, if there are any questions, then you can put them in the Q&A. I think we have a raised hand, so if you don't mind putting that to the Q&A section, we can get to that. We have just a few minutes left, so I wonder if Jonathan is there as well. I might bring you back because you've both had quite different kind of experiences despite starting from very similar places when you joined the Met Office. I wonder if both of you might give a little bit of advice to someone who might be thinking of following in either one of your footsteps. Do you want to go first, Zoe?
Yeah, I'd say just go for it. It might be daunting and it might be scary, especially if you haven't quite finished your degree yet. But it's if it's something you're interested in and you genuinely and truly want to do it, that will come through in your application. And whilst we are an office of lots of different people with scientific backgrounds, everyone's different. Everyone has their own differences and will approach a task differently as well. And that's only a benefit to an office as big as the Met Office.
Yeah, I'd say, I mean, certainly when you're first getting into it, like I sort of alluded to in my presentation, having that physics, maths background can be really important. It is sort of one of the things that they do sort of look for really in sort of the initial application rounds. But I would say even if you're not sort of properly in tune to that, don't worry that the whole job is going to be purely physics and maths based. I would say, particularly in my media forecasting side of things, I don't necessarily use the physics that they taught me at university and even in the OMFC, like on a regular daily basis. So depending on exactly where you end up within the Met Office, you can certainly find roles that are very physics based, or you can find some that are a little more or lenient on those sorts of things.
Thanks. I might also ask both of you what kind of skills that you got in your undergraduate degrees, which maybe are not quite meteorology related, do you actually find yourself using in your sort of day-to-day now?
For me, it's not necessarily. I think the big one for me is not necessarily was more the extracurricular activities I did at university, because whilst I grew up doing sort of drama and theatre, I then ended up leaning more towards student radio and student weather presentations and presenting to this university sort of TV channel, and that sort of build up of media expertise, shall I say, then just sort of combined with the meteorology that I was sort of eventually learning as well, and it ended up providing this really nice blend to go into the media forecasting side of things. So I think certainly the one thing I would like to have told my sort of younger self in years gone back is don't, I guess, just focus on what you're learning in the classroom. Think about how your other interests and activities can actually guide you in terms of where you apply your knowledge.
I would absolutely agree with everything Jonathan said, but from a skills within your degree that aren't your degree, I would certainly say if you have the opportunity to present, to lead a team, to just get up and stand and speak to people, I would take the opportunities you can, especially if it's something you're not very confident with. I think in just about every office or every team that is in operational meteorology, there is a requirement to speak to customers, to communicate the weather, be that on a video online or be that in face-to-face with a pilot in the office. They will need you to communicate the story as best you can, as effectively as you can, so that they really understand it. So any opportunity you have to just get better at speaking to people and communicating clearly is definitely one that you should try to take if you can.
Amazing. Thank you both so much. I think we've come to time. So thank you for speaking. Thank you to those who've attended, and hope to see you at another one of these sometime in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.